Good morning. It's very nice to be here with you. Thank you, Kelly, for your introduction. We have a full house. It's wonderful to have so many who share an interest in sexuality education all under one roof. This is terrific. As an educator, usually my first instinct is to arrange the seats in a circle and to get to look at everybody and make sure you can see each other. And they've actually done it a little bit. So it's nice to have a familiar environment. My purpose for today's talk is to explore some of the revolutionary implications for sex education in the digital age. As we get started, I'm curious as to whether any of you who are here today were actually raised in the digital age. Anybody? By a show of hands? Who may have had, oh, we have a number. Excellent. I was hoping we might have some real experts with us here today, and I'm glad we do. It seems to me that just when I think I'm finally getting a handle on how kids are implementing technology into their everyday lives, it seems like the kids are always one step ahead of me. So I'm glad to have those of you who are raised with all the new technologies here as backup. This is the first time I'm meeting directly with a sizable group of sexuality educators. At this conference, we have a very unique opportunity as a profession to consider how we might want to modify our programs to stay current in the digital age. I know that many of you who are teaching, especially in the public schools, will have a lot of material to cover in very limited time. So I'm hoping that as I present some of my ideas and the things that I've learned from doing this project, it will spark your interest and help you to establish some priorities as to what you think is relevant for the people that you work with. There's a wealth of knowledge and experience in this room, and I welcome your input as this conference gets underway. I thought I'd give you a little background as to how I got started. I first began working on this project about 4 years ago. I began by informally asking adults, this was my first entry into it, about how they thought the new technologies were going to impact on adolescent sexuality. And the people that I talked to were educators, mental health professionals, and parents particularly, and grandparents. On this list are the topics that were most frequently raised by adults in the population at large. It was clear to me from the start that people who took part in this survey viewed the link between adolescent sexuality and technology with a great deal of apprehension and concern. And when you just look at these topics, they are the things that everybody worries about. Will we be able to raise our children safely and constructively in the digital age? That's a very common goal. I'm very proud to say that the only people who I interviewed in my survey who weren't so worried were the sexuality educators. So in fact, they got very excited about it. And many of you started teaching about it and thinking about it years ago and have been doing that. So I don't think it's so new to some of the people who are in this room. Whenever traditional sexual mores are threatened, it's not unusual for people to grapple with their fears before they can mobilize and come up with a plan for how they want to proceed. In my day, it was viewed that Elvis Presley and rock and roll in general were going to corrupt a generation of teenagers. Well, compared to what we worry about today, Elvis is pretty benign. While all of the items on this list are legitimate and perfectly understandable, it bothered me that the technological era intensified anxiety about adolescent sexuality in general. When parenting styles and educational programs that are based in fear, they generally tend to present some very simple solutions to complex problems. The impulse that leads some to be restrictive or authoritative generally tends to shut off communication with young people. So that is a problem today. When sexting became newsworthy, one parent said to me, I better brace myself for the trouble kids are going to get into with all the technology. I can see it coming. And sexting really caught everybody by surprise, and it was something that was sort of initiated by the kids themselves. And it raised anxiety, and it raised anxiety about kids being sexual. There has never been any doubt in my mind that sexuality educators are the ideal group of professionals to take on the challenges in the digital age. We have a great deal of experience in addressing behaviors that put adolescents at risk. We used well-established teaching methodologies such as critical thought, discussion, problem solving, and small group interaction, and we apply them to sex-related topics of all types. I experienced the benefits of this type of education when I enrolled in the NYU sexuality program in 1975. And I'm very happy to see that the methods that I learned then are still very much practiced by sexuality educators today. And if you're new to the field, and as you go to some of our workshops, you're going to see them in action. Lots of discussion, lots of small group interaction. This was borne out when we sent out a request for lesson plan proposals to educators all around the country. We wanted to supplement our manual with different viewpoints from different educators at different grade levels. And across the board, the tried and true teaching methodologies were utilized, and they were applied very creatively to the topics related to the digital age. So we have the basic tools. Now what we have to do is update them and make them current to the relevant issues of our time. Of all the sources that I used to give direction to this project, teenagers were by far the most important and the most helpful. Adolescents taught me that not everything about the digital age has to be harmful or dangerous. I'd like to show you some examples of how teens are bringing their sex-related questions, concerns, and hormone-driven needs into the technological arena. These examples help to explain the link between adolescent sexuality and technology. Let's see what the kids have to tell us. And that's our last slide. I would love to talk to you about your reactions to this material. It really, some of the ways in which kids were using technology touched me very deeply. Some made us laugh. We see the humor in it and the youthfulness in it. But I think that it's really important to learn from kids, and they're wonderful educators. Several of the teenagers we just read about figured out how they could use the internet to ask the questions that they had about related to their sexual development. I think these kids have a big advantage all throughout adolescence and all throughout life, as a matter of fact. But the teenagers are adapting to enormous physical changes, mental, hormonal, and they scrutinize their own bodies. Just like the boy who questioned the normalcy of his own ejaculate, most adolescents have numerous questions about related to the changes that they're going to be experiencing. I don't know if any of you can remember a time when you came upon information that directly related to your sexuality. For me, it happened during the sexual revolution in the 1970s. The feminist writers began writing about female sexuality, and for the first time in my life, I was exposed to written information that affected me personally. I once went to a lecture given by Masters and Johnson. Everybody knew at that time that history was in the making, and by the way, they looked nothing like the actors who portray them in Masters of Sex. But it was an academic talk, but I was listening personally. Dr. Ruth Westheimer, and I talked to some people earlier, and people do remember her. I know from my area, I certainly do, but others, you know, I hope some of you do, because she was wonderful. Her show was popular because people could call in, ask the questions that they had about sex, and get reassuring answers. They could also see what other people were asking. And I don't really know of anybody who's not just a little bit curious as to how other people function sexually. We're cut off from this information. We want to know how we stack up against others. And luckily, today we have Siri, a modern-day version of Dr. Ruth. Although she lacks Dr. Ruth's warmth, Siri happens to be a fairly good, non-judgmental source of basic information about sex. And over the years, Google has become so perfected. Today, you can get answers to all types of sex-related questions simply by Googling the question. Even when teenage vernacular is used in the question, Google seems to know what's being asked. Having the ability to privately and independently search for sexual information as it unfolds and develops is a profoundly important possibility in the digital age. When I was researching this project and I was talking to adults, not one person, not even the sexuality educators, pointed to the benefits of being able to readily get access information about sexuality. We come from a very long tradition of sheltering people from this information. It's believed that it's going to incite, promiscuity. So, but this is a miraculous, it's almost so subtle, I would hate for us to pass it over, because it's really a very critical part of the digital age. The widespread availability of pornography seems to have poisoned the well. That's why blocks are installed on computers. Parents don't want their kids looking at pornography. And this is an unfortunate thing because it blocks out all of the appropriate information. It's like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And to complicate matters, the century-old prohibitions against sexual inquiry are very hard to get over. For example, imagine that you're doing some sex-related work on an airplane or in a coffee shop. This is the only time you have to do it. And a person sitting nearby you begins glancing at your screen. Do you think you'd be inclined to sort of, turn your screen away? Or would you stare them down because it's an intrusion? It's annoying under any circumstance when somebody interrupts, a private type of research. But when it comes to researching or asking or thinking about sexual issues, the old prohibitions seem to rear their ugly heads. When I researched child pornography laws for this project, I had a very irrational, fleeting thought that the FBI was going to come knocking on my door. And I also thought, if we were in the McCarthy era, but if the NSA were to gather up all the Google searches we did this past year and analyze a group of sexuality educators, I wonder what they would think. Would they think, wow, what a group, how experienced you are, how dedicated you are, how unfailingly you look up millions of things about sex. But I think there's a judgment attached to it. And for kids, their parents look over their shoulders. This may be real or imagined, but the anticipation of judgment related to sexuality, the inquiry, the asking of questions, that still exists today. Here are a list, I hope you can see the whole thing, of the recommended websites that we have used in our manual. And these are websites that are specifically designed for teenagers. They can, go refer to them. They can look up things that they're curious about. They can find out what other kids are asking on these sites. And there's an interactive nature to some of them, where kids can actually weigh in and give their opinions about anything that's being discussed. This list was compiled, it was printed in the Journal of Pediatrics, Clinical Pediatrics. The professionals that monitor these sites are either experts in human sexuality or medicine. So there's a lot of good information out there for kids. And you can go online and try them out. And I think it's a good way for you to get comfortable with what the kids are asking online. For an educator, the easiest way to begin to endorsing online information is to take the questions that the kids raise in class. You might want to give an answer to that, but then you can check it out and say, well, why don't we look at some of these sites and see if we can get extra information. Maybe there are other opinions about this. And the emphasis right now is on endorsing inquiry. Unfortunately, public schools are not generally equipped with unblocked computers to do any kind of sex education research. By a show of hands, how many of you teach in a setting where unblocked computers are provided for you for use with adolescents? Oh, good. 1, 2, 3, 4. Several. I'm happy to see that there are at least a few. But if you look at the size of us and how small this is, this really says something. I'm not aware of any national conversation that we've ever had about the wisdom of blocking out all sexual content from school computers. When you think about this, this is a form of censorship that is yet to be discussed openly. And I think right now it might be the time for sexuality educators to begin to raise this question in articles, in libraries, or, the librarians have been wonderful about censorship issues. Well, this may be our time to raise the flag about some of these things. A conversation with administrators who oversee your programs might be a good idea. I would never suggest that you recommend to parents or a school administrator that they completely, eliminate all the blocks on computers. I know I have some strong feelings about that, but I think people have to grow into that concept, just like we would teach young people to consider all different options before we put them on the spot and we make generalizations or recommendations. But hopefully, what we could ask them to do directly is to unblock the recommended websites. And that's a good place to start, and I hope that happens. If you can ever present some kind of rationale as to how computer research would augment your programs, I think that would be good. I don't know, I have a group here. Do you think computer research would be a good addition to sex education programs? Just by a show of hands, how many of you think that it would enhance our field if we began to teach kids how to use this? So I guess I'm not the only one. Most of you seem to, have some opinion about it, and I think that's a good thing. When adults sanction online inquiry, I think we're helping to develop a skill that can go throughout life. I know that if I were to work with a group of seniors right now, none of whom may have even used the internet to ask questions, and we began to raise all the questions that we have at this stage in life about sex, we would find a lot of things to look up, and we would have fun in it. And I think the kids would too. What I always loved about teaching sex education is that it's so personal. Everything you teach, even the most factual and dry information, gets applied to somebody's life in a very personal and meaningful way. And it can make a huge difference in whether or not somebody gets pregnant, or whether somebody gets a disease, or when somebody wants to break up from an unhappy relationship. You can type all this stuff into Google. How do I get out of a bad relationship? And you're going to find a lot of sites to help you. So I think computer research is a good thing. One of the nicest things about a revolution is that you're allowed to think expansively. So that's one of my first offerings in terms of that. Now I think I got mixed up. Okay, I'm ready to move on. According to current research, and I'm going to be talking about teen-to-teen communications. This is mostly by text messaging and social media. This is an area that I'm concerned about, and a lot of people are. What is it that teenagers are saying to each other that's related to sex? And when you start looking into this, sexual traits are targeted very commonly, particularly by early adolescents. According to current research, adolescents that communicate by text messages exchange about 60 texts per day. That's a lot. I don't know how many all of us exchange, but over the years, a lot. The good news is that for adolescents, most of the messages that go teen to teen are perfectly fine. They're not harmful in any way to self or others. But this is not always the case. The American Association of University Women conducted a national survey on teen-to-teen sexual harassment in grades 7 through 12. The study revealed that 30% of the respondents reported online harassment, such as unwelcome comments, jokes, or having sexual rumors, information, or pictures sent around without consent. 30% is a lot of teenagers, and what the study showed was that the impact was significant. As we saw earlier in the slides, teenagers comment freely about how others look and act. They have always done this, but cyber harassment spreads more widely and can have a more devastating impact. And this negativity can significantly affect the ways in which an adolescent perceives his or her own sexual development. I think this is very sad. Adolescence is the very worst time to be criticized for your sexual development. Nobody is comfortable about it at this age. And so the comments are hurtful, and it causes self-doubt. Although many parents are talking to their kids about online bullying or cyber harassment, much of the teen-to-teen communications fly below the radar. Nobody can keep on top of every communication that's being sent out. And so therefore, it becomes very important that teens have some skills to monitor their own communications. You know, they started in the digital age without any guidelines. So throughout the various lessons in our manual, we use simulated text messages and sample social media posts to illustrate that electronic communications are not just lost out in cyberspace. They impact on real people in concrete ways. And the lessons that we used, we hope to help teens have these standards to see what communications might be truthful, hurtful, offensive, or supportive. And we try to get the kids to look at these values and to see how they apply to these sample messages that we send out in class. It's a hard thing to achieve. There are kids that will be very negative about this, but it's worth a try. Anti-bullying campaigns are certainly important. The zero tolerance policies in schools have been a very good start. Teachers are more likely to intervene when they see intolerant comments or actions. So for our manual, we have included 2 anti-bullying campaigns. I just saw a wonderful YouTube video put out in Pennsylvania, Kelly, by the teachers in a school. They had used technology very creatively themselves to teach the kids that one of your options when you're bullied is to shake it off. And so they used, I don't know if you know that Taylor Swift video that she has and song, Shake It Off. Well, the teachers were all dressed up as teenagers, and they were going around the school, being videotaped in the hallways saying, shake it off. You don't have to listen to it. So I think that's one way that technology kind of creeps into the classroom. And Pennsylvania, Kelly, is a good leader in that front, so thank you. To really push the needle further, the culture at large has to change, though. And I think educators can contribute to this change by making sure that all lesson plans that are used in sex education are inclusive. And by this, I mean that they begin with the assumption that the participants in each and every group will be sexually and developmentally diverse. no group is homogeneous in terms of sexuality. So for an example, in our manual, we use gay, lesbian, and heterosexual characters in role-playing and problem-solving activities. Comfort and tolerance evolves when we normalize diversity. So we can't do this enough. And I think that when our manual was checked by, I don't know how many people, Bill, 100 million, it seemed at the time, one of the things that they looked at was the diversity issue. And when you pick up a curriculum, it's good for you to look at it as well. In a positive way, technology can be of help to adolescents who feel outside of the norm with regard to their body types, sexual orientation, gender identity, or social standing. We now have chat rooms and blogs and websites for teens that can counter isolation. Finding support from others who share similar challenges enables identification with peers. And this is a revolutionary change for young people who may feel very much alone in their local communities. Recently, we are seeing the evidence about the role that social media can play in bringing about change. Bill started off our morning today about what was happening in Staten Island. And there are protests now that are going around all throughout the country. And it's really social media that helps to organize these protests and helps to really bring to the public awareness issues that we have known exist, but you know, we're not able to do away with them. I love to see students protesting. The students are representing Ferguson. In Hong Kong, the students, you know, it was about free and open elections, but students become a voice that can't be dismissed or easily ignored. I look forward to the day that adolescents themselves, in their own voice, will prove to be the best agents for putting an end to the discrimination of LGBT youth. I think this is possible now. Times are changing. Kids are now using Twitter and other polling devices to be used for advocacy. And as the culture at large becomes more tolerant, I think we can begin to see more and more teenagers expressing their own outrage regarding intolerance. I think it's starting. If we didn't do very much with social media for change and tolerance in our manual, but I think if anybody here is looking for a great project, actually, is anybody doing something about social media for tolerance? I don't see so yet. I think this would be a wonderful contribution to the field, with particularly LGBT rights, but even now this you know, rash of rapes in colleges, I think people are going to get disgusted about that. And I wouldn't be surprised if I see many women and men at the college level beginning to raise their voices about that issue. So social media is a fabulous, powerful tool, and it is revolutionary for organizing protest. And next I turn to sexting. Sexting, it was interesting, I didn't turn it on here. If you step back and observe the public's reaction to sexting, it makes for a very interesting sociological study. As you might expect, teenagers, when they began to see the explicit sexual pictures, they looked at them with interest, curiosity, shock, and excitement. The parents were troubled. No parent I know wants to see a nude picture of their child circulating around a school. But I am very sympathetic to the needs of parents because they already feel challenged about adolescent sexual development, and sexting compounded this anxiety for them. School administrators were faced with the dilemma of how to protect students who were humiliated by sexual incidents, and this is not easy to correct. Law enforcement officials were in a quandary. In many states, transmitting or possessing sexually explicit pictures of minors violates child protection laws, and it's considered a felony. What were we going to do? Charge hundreds and hundreds of kids as felons for their sexual experimentation? This is kind of outrageous. So we were in a mess. Now most of the states are trying to relax the laws and make it more of a minor offense. But I think that it's important in the work that we do that we cut down on the hysteria and we provide some constructive opportunities to explore this issue. designing lesson plans about sexting turns out to be fairly complex. On a cognitive level, the ability to distinguish between public and private information that has to be made very concrete for teens. We got one really interesting lesson called "You Can't Get It Back." That once you send something out there, it's very hard. It's impossible to retrieve it. And this is really hard to grasp, particularly if you have the brain of a 12-year-old. As teens get older, this is where it gets very tricky. They want pictures of their sexual encounters to remember their sexual experiences, as well for sexual stimulation. Picture taking becomes associated with sexual arousal. And preventative lessons are much more difficult to accomplish when sexual motivation is involved. There's a whole change in brain chemistry. The prefrontal cortex, where the judgment is, that's the function of that part of the brain, that shuts down during sexual arousal, and the pleasure principle takes over, the dopamines and the feel-good chemicals, which really are to motivate us to reproduce. That's what, in evolutionary terms, that's why the feel-good chemicals are so powerful. And so judgment does fly out the window, and it's hard to teach about this subject matter. Anthony Weiner is a prime example. Anthony Weiner had an opportunity to learn about the consequences related to sexting. And he didn't, and in spite of that, he continued to sext, even though he had tremendous consequences to his personal and professional life. I think it points out that some of the decision-making model that we've always used in sex education, which I don't use anymore, but it does present a problem because, for Anthony Weiner, it didn't prevent him from continuing to sext. We have several lesson plans in our manual on sexting, and it's a fun topic to explore with kids. They like it. It's interesting to them. I don't know if you would set this as a priority as being more important than information about contraception in your program. You have limited time to teach things, but it's one that I think enlivens a sex ed program, and if it does prevent some children from being humiliated, I think it's certainly worth it. My personal viewpoint about sexting is that we're really witnessing a relaxation in our societal values about nudity in general, and that maybe when we look back in 20 years, sexting won't create such a stir. So we'll have to see. I don't know if I'll be here, but you'll be able to notice it. And now we talk about pornography. Throughout the ages, there have always been graphic depictions of sexual behavior, and in today's climate, however, pornography is more abundant and readily available than ever before. But despite the increased availability, the corresponding opportunities to talk about this with educators and parents and peers is sorely lacking. As a society, I think we're stuck in a bind. Pornography is the primary reason why blocks are installed on computers. But as we saw in the slides, when teens circumvent the barriers, we're left with mistrust and guilt, and we don't have a model for how to talk about this sensitive issue with young people. I think where we start is to begin to develop skills for talking comfortably about pornography with young people. I don't know why this is so hard for parents to do this. Maybe because it's associated with masturbation, it makes it hard. But I think it's a good place to begin. Most school curricula do not include formal lesson plans on pornography to date. But if you're a sexuality educator working with young people, there's a very good chance that they're going to be asking you questions about pornography. So I think, one of the things that I did in preparing for this manual was to just anticipate some of the questions that kids were going to ask about pornography and then take a stab at answering the questions. And my version can be found in volume 2. But I really suggest that you go through this process yourselves, and that you, if you're an experienced educator, to get a narrative in your head as to how you want to talk to kids about this topic and what you really want to say. because it's easy to think about the normalcy of it for many of the sex educators, that pornography is an outlet for heightened sexual sensations that occur during adolescence, and it's a way to learn about one's sexual response cycle. But when it comes to the potential negatives, we're not so clear about that. There's all kinds of opinions, and new research is needed down the line to see what happens when kids start looking at this at very early ages before they had contact with a real partner. And this can go on for years, so that their early sexual learning is very tied into the imagery and the eroticism of pornography. And so there's a lot for us to really think about. I think the best way to begin to form a narrative in your head about pornography is to go online. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's wonderful information about how to talk to children about this. I use the search terms, talking to teens about pornography. I found that that sort of limited the field, and it made it a little bit easier to get some material that might be appropriate for use with kids. I think that when I am faced with it, I know you probably have a lot of questions about the research in this field. I think we need research way down the line, truthfully, and we're not quite there yet. But what I used as research were things that I gleaned from people, discussions that I had, things that I found that were relevant to the kids right now. And these things that stood out in my mind were some boys report that they can't measure up to the sexual performance that is portrayed by males in pornography. And gay porn presents very exaggerated, stereotypic images of gay men that teenage boys can mistakenly believe is the norm expected of them when they go out to form relationships. I mean, is this the kind of imagery that we really want our boys to aspire to? There's something very troubling about it. Just the performance aspect, it's much more common for an early adolescent boy or a middle or later to have premature ejaculation than to be able to go on infinitum, you know, with their sexual encounters. It's not where they are in experience and where their bodies are. So I think that it's really maybe good to bring up those kinds of things so that kids don't feel that they have to aspire to these kinds of images. And girls sometimes report that they feel coerced by their boyfriends into emulating pornographic behavior. And this pressure is unwanted and very anxiety-producing. Can you imagine a girl who's never had sex before and now is being encouraged to emulate some of this stuff that they see in pornography? Pornography will never model how to talk about wanted and unwanted behavior in a relationship, but adolescents can learn these skills in a good sexuality education program. So I think that our programs can supplement. Many of you teach about communication skills. I think this is one of the most important topics in a sex ed curriculum. Well, start to filter in some of these issues involving the pressure to sext or the pressure to emulate pornography, and have the kids role play this out and work it out and develop a dialogue that they think they could use if they found themselves in that kind of situation. We understand very clearly that the teaching about pornography is controversial, and this is particularly controversial in public schools. The groups that are against sex education in general are not going to like this, but it gives them a perfect opportunity to say, you see what they're doing in the public schools, and that they point to this as a rationale to further their cause. But I think that we really don't have a choice. We can't leave adolescents without opportunities to explore this issue with each other and with qualified educators. So the skills among all of us are sorely needed in the digital age. In closing, I would like to say that writing this manual was a collaborative process from start to finish. And I would like to acknowledge all of the authors that contribute to our manual. Are any of you here today? I hope you are. Who is? Could you stand up? Anybody who's written a lesson plan? Bill, come on, you did a lot of them. Good. There's somebody down there. This project was done solely through computer use. So there's no way that we could really all meet and talk, but thank you for your contribution, all of those of you that did contribute lesson plans. It really made our manual what it is. I would like to especially thank Bill Taverner. Bill is the executive director of the Center for Sex Education, and he is one of the most enthusiastic sexuality, I'll call him that, educators that I know. He was involved in every single phase of this project, from securing funding to developing lesson plans and to reading with a very experienced eye every single word of the manual. This project never could have happened without your direction, Bill. You are one of a kind. Thank you. I will applaud you for that. Sue Milstein was the editor for our manual. Sue knows a great deal about how to get a manuscript ready for print, but she's also a very experienced sexuality educator, and all of her experience and knowledge is reflected in the work that was the final product. Sue is dancing right now. She's one of the Irish. I got my ethnicity mixed up. She's an Irish step dancer, so she couldn't be with us today, but she should be. She was a big part of this project. And lastly, it is sexuality educators who will ultimately bring our lesson plans to life. Those of you who work directly with teenagers will have the greatest impact on how we can help young people to live safely and constructively in the digital age. Thank you for your attention this morning. We have time for questions.
Yeah, so I actually research pornography use in adolescent development, and I work with schools in Pennsylvania to teach sex educators, school counselors, teachers, and parents how to talk to kids about porn. So if anyone wants to know the scoop on that, you can either come to my session or email me. My name is Megan Moss, so I just wanted to take that opportunity to say that I love this manual, and I think that this is going to continue to be a really important topic. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We tried in our pornography lessons, and we did write, have 2 of them that are included, to really take an underground topic and make it worthy of a serious investigation. So thank you, Megan, and you're doing good work. Anybody?
We have one.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. I think it's so relevant in our current culture. I teach sexuality education at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas to adolescents and adults. I mean, I've got a 65-year-old student in my class. And when we talk about sex education now, so many kids are educating themselves, right? But in our social media world, I was curious if you had all mentioned the use of some of these technologies like Grindr and Tinder that are allowing for personal exploration, but sometimes in a more detached way or in a more anonymous way. And if you think that we should be teaching about online safety in these like kind of new dating and sexual environments where kids can, well, and when I say kids, it's easy to say you're 18, right? We live in a world where, yes, I agree, I'm 18, I can watch that porn, right? So do you think that that's something that we need to be teaching about as sex educators and talking about these technologies? And also, I personally use the conversation of porn to talk about how there's a difference between adult entertainment and sex education, and how when we see some of these things like people having like anal to oral situations in porn, how that's not realistic, and how a lot of these porn stars are professionals, right? They know their body very well and they know the risks of that. But as teenagers, they want to model that behavior because nobody has told them that porn is fake. Like, they think that they idealize it. So that's kind of my 2 questions. Do you think that we should be talking about these social connection, dating, anonymous kind of GPS tracking sex things?
Sure, I think it's a very good question. In our manual, we didn't really address casual sex. We thought this was, probably more relevant for a college population than some of the middle school kids and high school kids that we were sort of gearing our work towards. But It's very shocking to me as an adult to see things like Bang with Friends, where within a very anonymous way you can just find out who's interested in your friend list to have sex with. This is something that, and the performance stuff. There was one I saw about I just had sex, and there were little icons that showed the position you did, and it's sort of like the prowess thing that gets the word out that you are among the few lucky ones that may have had sex. So I think there is a place for it. We didn't do it so much in our manual. I think if I were working with college kids, I would really be doing it, because I think that's when a lot of the hookups start, and they're using this for anonymous relationships, and it is something to be concerned about. A lot of people criticize technology because it takes away the intimacy. You know, and there was a book written by Sherry Turkell. You know, Alone Together was her book. And she warns people that, you know, things are getting much more casual and there's less face-to-face contact. So it's an area of concern. Yes, it is. Anybody else? There isn't. I would like to just use one more example. Then I think the most revolutionary aspect of the digital age is how kids are incorporating technology into their everyday lives. We just had a family outing on Thanksgiving. It was the day after Thanksgiving, and we took our grandchildren. We have 4 grandchildren, ages 12 through 15, to go bowling. And I thought that I was pretty knowledgeable about all this technology stuff. And what happened at this bowling event, the kids were very engaged in the activity. They were high-fiving after each, you know, frame that they accomplished. But then they would sit down and begin on their phones after they had a turn. Every single one of them did this. They returned to their seat and started doing this. So I finally asked one of them, I said, are you texting your friends at home? And they said, oh no, we're playing Trivial Pursuit. And we started this game before we came out bowling, and we wanted to finish it. So they were sort of multitasking and doing 2 events at one time. And then one of them, midway, started doing videotaping. I didn't realize she was doing this. As she was walking around, she photographed all of us in the family. And when we got home, she put all these videos together, and she you know, created a wonderful memorabilia that our family can have. So I think that what kids do with technology, we always focus on the worries, but it's so inventive, it's creative, it comes from them, and I think they have wonderful opportunities for learning. So I thank you very much for your time today.